You're listening to The Intellectual Investor, special episode, Michael Covel interview on Trend Following Radio. To learn more about Vitaliy's investing firm, IMA, go to imausa.com. Michael Covel interview on Trend Following Radio. Vitaliy recently sat down with his friend Michael Covel of Trend Following Radio. Michael and Vitaliy discuss investing in today's environment, luxury beliefs, energy, and tribalism in American society today. The episode was recorded in January 2022, prior to the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion.
A return guest today, Vitaliy Katsenelson, out of the good state of Colorado, I do believe. A value guy, not a trend-following guy, but a value guy. Now, the interesting thing is, a lot of value guys actually have a very similar perspective to trend-following guys. It's just a different strategy. Because I seriously doubt anyone listening really wants to heap a bunch of negative whatever onto Warren Buffett, who is a value guy. Now, don't get me wrong. I've taken my pot shots at Buffett over inconsistencies and all that kind of fun stuff over the years. But the bottom line, a hell of a lot of success. Vitaliy and I cover some territory today. I take him all around places he probably wasn't expecting. But he's a sharp mind, a quick wit, and we had fun. That's the key, right? Can we take you on a little bit of a journey for about an hour and give you some insights? Give a different perspective. We tried. I hope we succeeded. Without any further delay or setup, let's jump right into my conversation today with Vitaliy Katsenelson. We're lucky in the sense that we're talking right now, late January, because we were talking in December, and it's much more interesting now. But once we got past the holidays in the U.S., the proverbial you-know-what has hit the fan, hasn't it?
If you're a value investor, you're kind of on the good side of it. If you were a growth investor, you would have been slaughtered. As a value investor, it feels good to me.
You're still not to valuations. If I look at guys like Jeremy Grantham or John Hussman, you're still not to valuations where you'd be really, really happy yet.
The market is that we are up a little bit for the year just because we are value driven. Not because of hedge, it's just value stocks held up and the growth stocks collapsed. That's what happened. So I'm happy.
Let's see what unfolds this year. It's going to be interesting. I look at it right now on the horizon, and in my mind, I see these, this is just me picking things, but I see let's call them four big things. I see, okay, you have the COVID, which is continuing to be a big thing. I see Jeremy Grantham talking about the popping of a super bubble. I see Michael Saylor talking about holding Bitcoin forever. And then I see a significant number of my fellow Americans that want to roll tanks into Ukraine and fight a proxy war with Russia. So there is all kinds of excitement at the moment, isn't there?
That's very true. And let's touch on Russia a little bit because I have some things to say. So from Jeremy Grantham perspective, I think he's right that the valuations are very high overall. When the valuations are high, expected returns are low. It's just because valuations are basically like a pendulum. When a bulk of your return comes from price to earnings going from a very, very high levels, then at some point, it's a loan you have to pay back. So from their perspective, I actually agree with him. In fact, the book I wrote, I talked about the market cycles. When I wrote the book, I did not realize that we're going to have zero interest rates. But at the time, I thought we're going to have basically, and I started writing the book in 2005. So I thought we're going to have 16, 18 years of sideways markets. The Great Recession kind of changed it a little bit because it took interest rates down to zero and then which kind of the fuel under the stock market. But anyway, so from a Jeremy Grantham perspective, I kind of agree that I expect returns for an average stock going forward over the next 5 or 10 years are going to be miserable. Okay. About COVID, I think the Omicron is a gift to us because I think it just kind of creates herd immunity. It's much milder than Delta or previous variants.
Let me stop you off of COVID for a second. You and I are not epidemiologists. We don't know any of that kind of stuff. We're not doctors. However, I think we both are learned people in the sense that the most interesting thing about COVID is, frankly, what it's doing to the behavior of human beings. And I see this real divide right now, and I want your view, but I see this divide where it seems like one group is deathly afraid and is going to be deathly afraid going forward for a long time. And the other group is like, what in the hell is going on? This is BS. And those two groups, that combustible place where they're both meeting, that seems to be the most interesting thing to me about COVID.
It's like politics. It becomes very tribal. It's become extremely divisive.
That leads to chaos. I mean, that leads to conflict. That leads to not smooth sailing, which again gets back into the market perspective where we're going to go today. But with the backdrop of two different tribes being at each other, that doesn't seem like the smoothest potential ride in the future.
Put it this way, it doesn't help the social fabric of our society, which has kind of already been peeling away. You're going to have a lot of debates going forward. Kids be wearing masks to school or not, this kind of stuff.
Does it make you afraid to have the debate? You might not be able to say this on the podcast. Maybe you don't want to say it, but I think deep down, you don't think kids should be wearing masks. I'm putting words in your mouth.
I don't think should be wearing masks. I read a study a while back that showed that basically the masks are actually harmful for little kids. That study, that was not the case for adults. There is a cost to that.
Why are we not considering those costs? Why are we at a point where it was like mask up the little kids and not consider any of the other cost, only the fear?
We do first level thinking, right? I read somewhere that the schools in Flint, Michigan now going remote. So a whole bunch of kids are basically going to be undereducated another year or two. That is a huge consequence on society. That's a huge impact on those kids. But the consequence of that, you don't see them directly right away. We're paying for them in the future, where perceived impact of fewer people getting sick is immediate. So I think that's why.
It's frightening to me because it seems like America used to have checks and balances. It used to seem like America was not a place where some random person walks into the public square and that person is, quote, fear, and fear walks into the square and just starts screaming fearful things and the crowd would run. It used to be people be like, well, hold on, explain yourself. What fear are you talking about? It seems like now we've got to the point where it's like, if someone yells fire, everyone just runs.
I agree with you. I think we're becoming a nation, and this is not just us. I think it's Western Europe as well, with luxury beliefs. We have these beliefs that they usually operate on the first level thinking, not on the second level thinking. They make us feel good. When they meet reality, they fail. And let me give you an example. I'm going to change the topic a little bit, but green energy. And if you look at solar power and wind power, and this is not even the United States now, it's Germany. In Germany, after Fukushima, they got in the process of shutting down the nuclear power plants. And they start to switch to wind and solar because they wanted to become green. In the process of doing that, the electricity prices went up a lot and CO2 increased as well. And the reason for that, because wind and solar, they're intermittent. Sun does not always shine. The wind doesn't always blow. Coal power plants that produce a lot of CO2. And to make things even more interesting, they're relying on natural gas from Russia. Because they produce less electricity, now they're relying on natural gas from Russia. To tie this even more into what's going on right now in the world, Russia is threatening that they're going to invade Ukraine. The United States is threatening Russia. If you invade Ukraine, they're going to cut you off from a SWIFT system. SWIFT banking system, basically, nobody will be able to use a credit card in Russia if that happens. So Russia says, well, if you do that, then we're going to natural gas to Europe. If you were a German politician and you were thinking about it 8 years ago, well, let's look at not at the first level effects, but the second level effects. That makes us more dependable on Russia, which is not hasn't been your opinion, German friend for a long time, for a while now. And also to make things worse, you basically traded a very clean energy that's very predictable for energy that when it's there, it's clean. But when it's not there, the substitute is very dirty. Anyway, that is our luxury belief. It's so politically correct to be for green energy. But except it's not green, is it? It's not really green if you have to use power plants that produce a lot of CO2. We as a society, and I'm talking about now United States and Europe, we've become fat and happy.
Quite literally.
Yeah, especially the United States. If you look at China, this pains me because I grew up in Russia, Soviet Russia, and I don't like man-controlled economies. But Chinese are so much more pragmatic than the West. They're building 250 nuclear power plants. And you know what? If you want a nuclear power plant in the United States, it takes 25 years. They're going to build 250 of them in the next 20 or something years. That's my depressing view of the world, I guess.
I'm comfortable with this, our conversation just going off in any direction. That's fine with me. But you brought something up, growing up in the former USSR, you, yourself, your family, growing up under Soviet communism. You bring up China, and I've done my share of getting around mainland China in the last decade. Compare and contrast. I did not have a chance to go to Soviet Russia, but the two forms of communism are very different.
They are.
I was just in America for 6 weeks. When I talk to American friends, if they're talking to me about China or Vietnam, for example, they just look at me and they say, but it's communism. But it's communism. Okay, it is, but it's not the kind of communism that you grew up thinking about.
They have one thing in common, though. Let me tell you one thing in common between Soviet Russia and the communistic China: the personal liberty, personal rights. This is a nuanced conversation because the reason it takes 20 years to build a power plant, a nuclear power plant in the United States, because we have a lot of bureaucracy, but also because back and forth between citizens and the power company or whoever wants to build a power plant. China, same thing would have been in Soviet Russia. You have this shortcut to greatness. In other words, you just do this imminent domain on steroids. The reason they were so much more effective dealing with COVID when it just broke out in China, because they just locked up people in the houses and bolted their doors. But there's a cost, personal liberty. Saying I'm confused is probably not the right word, but I can see both sides of it. I can see advantages and disadvantages. And I still, after living in Soviet Russia and experiencing all the corruption that comes with communism and a controlled economy and all these bureaucrats, I tell you, I would pick the fat and happy America anytime still over China. But at the same time, I can see how we are losing. We are losing to China. We are losing because over the last 20 years, we kind of lost our pragmatism, I guess. That's what happened to the United States.
We've lost a lot of rights, too. The virus comes to America in early 2000. Plenty of Americans have lost their businesses. They've lost their livelihoods. They've lost years of schooling. They've been forced to take certain actions, even if they were never sick. And those are all loss of rights. For me, spending 8 or 9 years outside of America, I start to think that the American, and you've got an interesting perspective coming from where you did to America, but I definitely don't think that fanciful look up to America, they've got such great individual rights. It sure doesn't look like that to me. And I'll take it a step further. If I look at mine and yours ability to say things, you and I have to, since we are speaking in public quite a bit, we're writing in public, you and I have to self-censor. Now, somebody might say, well, Mike, you and Vitaliy, you guys have to self-censor because you're involved with social media companies, and those social media companies have rules and whatnot. And if you say the wrong thing and YouTube doesn't like it, they can take you down. And those are just private companies. That's a load of you know what, because those private companies have got U.S. government protection. I look at this rights thing with America. It might not be the exact loss of rights that took place in the former Soviet Union. It might not be the exact loss of rights that you don't have in China. I think for us Americans to pretend that we are not losing rights, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, I just laid out where I see it.
I agree with you. And I wrote this essay, which was published in Barron's. It's talked about that, exactly that. I came to the United States 30 years ago on December 4th, 1991. Last December was 30 years. I wrote this essay reflecting on my life in the United States. And one of the points I made that I think I understand this country less now than I did 20 years ago. The couple points. Number one, that we became very tribal. And when you become tribal, you stop thinking. When you belong to a tribe has a program curriculum. I don't know what you want to call it, but give an example. If you talk to a Democrat, I know exactly what Democrat is going to tell me. If I talk to a Republican, I know exactly what Republican is going to tell me. And those conversations are very uninteresting to me because there is very little thought. It's what the mothership tells them to say. When you become tribal, you lose nuance. That's why, like conversation about China, United States, there is a lot of nuance. But now about self-censoring, I was going to go on Twitter when Chris Cuomo was fired by CNN. I was going to write that CNN has the right to fire him because that's a private company. And I was going to say something along the lines that I don't have a problem with Chris Cuomo because he was basically jeopardizing his career to help his brother. I'm not endorsing what his brother did, etc. But I was going to make a different point that I tell my kids, I have 3 kids, I tell them that their brothers and sisters are the most important people in their lives, even more important than their spouses. And their responsibility is to take care of each other. So I was going to write about that, completely political. But then I self-censored myself. And I self-censored myself because I just did not want to have this people coming out after me, but tell me how horrible his brother is, whatever. And you know what? When we self-censor ourselves, we basically destroy freedom of speech, one self-censoring at a time. So I do agree with you that we do this more and more. We are less free now in the United States than we were 10 years ago. We are doing it to ourselves.
I find this part with the social media, which it may be changing. It seems like there's new platforms and all that kind of stuff. But the idea that I could take white papers from the CDC, white papers from academic journals with accomplished people and read those on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and be banned from these platforms and have no recourse because of government exemptions. You talk about rights. I tell people sometimes when I'm in Asia, the places that I see censorship on the internet. If I'm in Thailand, I see censorship on the internet. If I'm in Singapore, I see censorship on the internet. I don't see it in Japan. If I'm China, I can't access certain things. I don't see censorship in Vietnam. So it's really interesting. It really takes some time to kind of move around to see what's going on. But the censorship that's taking place in America is quite nefarious.
Coming back to Russia, my father had a friend whose brother, when he died, he left him some books. And one of the books was one of Solzhenitsyn's books. KGB found out that my father's friend has that book. And basically, my father's friend lost his job. He was a teacher at that prestigious university, and he lost his job. And he actually got off easy because he could have gone to jail. Obviously, being banned from social media is less than that, but it has similar shades. You have opinions that you're allowed to have, and you can voice, and opinions you cannot voice. And then, ironically, 6 months later, you find out that people that were banned from Twitter for whatever their thoughts were on that the virus came from a lab in China, that's actually now prevailing where the virus came. We are less free. One part where I struggle that Twitter still, or Facebook still are private companies. And this is where I struggle with that. They have incredible power, but they're still private companies.
They have these exemptions. I forget the particular legislation, but they have these exemptions that being a publisher, not being a publisher, and those have got to go. Then I'm on your side. Let me ask you a question. One thing that's really interesting I noticed when I first came to Vietnam was you go in the bookstores and even government-owned bookstores, and I'm like, well, that's an interesting title to see on the shelf in modern-day Vietnam. There's The Fountainhead and there's Atlas Shrugged translated into Vietnamese on the shelves. I didn't expect to see that. Is there anything in modern Russia right now that is excluded from the shelves, or is everything wide open?
I wouldn't know because last time I've been to Russia was 13 years ago, 14 years ago. I doubt it. I mean, I think it's all there. It's kind of interesting. The way Russian government brainwashes people, actually done very differently, but it's incredibly effective. Russian government basically controls TV. I forget, there is a first channel, second channel, and third channel. and they control the message that people hear.
But what people? The over 75 generation? I mean, the young people are on TikTok. Are there access restrictions to the West on the internet in Russia?
I don't think so, but you know what happens? You would think that you have all this information. That's what I thought. You would think that there's all this information. They can go and read Wall Street Journal, New York Times. They can read anything they want. China, some of the American websites are blocked. There's no great firewall in Russia. So they can go anywhere they want. However, when I studied marketing at the University of Colorado, one thing I learned there is that for somebody to remember your message, they need to hear it 6 times. Well, when you're working and you come home and you turn on TV and you watch your favorite shows, and then you watch evening news, that evening news is basically curated directly from Kremlin. Therefore, Putin is always presented as this mythical figure who is fighting for, average Russian. And if you watch this enough, it's basically brainwashes you, or most of the population, to think that's what it is.
If I turn on CNN and I watch it every night, I'm going to feel brainwashed too.
Yes, there is a difference between biases. I changed my mind on this. In the past, I would have argued with you about this. When I think about CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, the same thing happens, and you watch 3 different channels, and they have completely different interpretation. They stopped being news channel, and this became interpretation channels. The same happened in Russia, except it's the government tells you what to do. So there, CNN makes a choice.
But hold on, if CNN puts Comey, Clapper, and Brennan on nonstop, is that really CNN, or is that the American government? Just to give a little devil's advocate position to your stance there.
They can go on any channel they want to go.
They go to particular channels, that's for sure.
Yeah, and that's fine. It's definitely biases. I'm not disagreeing about this. All I'm trying to say is that you probably will lose your job. I guess people can lose your
I mean, look, let's go to the higher level here. Maybe we could make the argument that there's a convergence of power at the top on a lot of these means of communication. So whatever country you want to go to, you could say China, you could say Russia, you could say America. I think each person could argue that more and more power is being concentrated at the top, and more messaging is starting to look like pure propaganda at the top of a lot of countries, not just the ones we're talking about. It seems like every country is controlling the message in such a way to, the truth is far from seen.
Absolutely. This is why on Twitter, I follow different news publications from different countries, because I get to see different news from different angles. I'll follow Al Jazeera, and I know whatever they're going to report about Palestinian-Israeli relationships, I know the bias, but they're probably going to be less biased reporting on what's going on between Ukraine and Russia. You see what I mean? Because that's not in their so-called bias, I guess.
Let me take you on a U-turn, though. So here we talk about all these things, and some of the audience might already be feeling their blood pressure rise, or maybe they're feeling a little excited or whatever. But I don't really find myself becoming terribly, I might get emotional in my voice or my inflection, but in terms of my personality, I find myself very stoic about these issues, meaning, okay, what can I control? What can I do in my life? And yes, these things are going on out there, and some of these things might be good, they might be bad. Ultimately, in terms of leading one's life, I mean, I noticed a few people, I bring this up, I noticed a few people get really vociferous on my Facebook. They're ready to send the American troops into Ukraine, and they're ready to fight that hot war with Russia right now. Send American boys there right now. And they're so emotional about it. They're just like, we've got to do it. And I'm like, where's that come from? Because ultimately, you can't really have a nice life if you're that geared up all the time.
I think my goal for the last couple of years, I made this choice, is that I read more books. I watch very little TV in general. That's due to my blood pressure. You're right. There is absolutely nothing you can do about this. There are things in your life you can control and things you can't control. When you watch news, it's, in all honesty, most of it has 0 calories and it has a shelf life of a day or 2. If you read books have shelf lives of forever. I have to read news. I guess my professional hazard. I'm an investor. There, I've tried to focus less on politics and focus on economy and geopolitics a bit more.
I'm just going to keep throwing stuff at you. I'm looking from afar. I saw it a little bit when I was back in the States in November and December. Why are the shelves at the local markets, Costco, local drugstore, et cetera, why are those shelves in America in 2022 starting to look like the former Soviet Union? Why are these shelves empty? And why are people not complaining? Like, what is going on? It seems entirely nuts to me.
Is that what you saw when you were here?
I saw shelves empty for sure. That's just my personal experience. But if I can look out to the broader experience, clearly there's been a ton of news about this as well, that shelves are empty.
I saw this in March, April 2020. Then it made sense because it was a panic. A grocery store has inventory maybe for 5 days, and people come in and just stock up for 2 weeks, and grocery store runs out of inventory.
It seems odd. Look, I've seen you write about your curiosity with the, quote, labor shortage, why there's so many jobs out there and whatnot. And so I think a lot of these things tie together, and maybe it's a result of COVID. It seems like countries have been kind of knocked off their equilibrium. There doesn't seem to be a rebound back to normalcy fast.
Speaking of unintended consequences, when you stop the economy, restarting it is incredibly difficult because it's almost like when you restart it, you have these pieces in different places, and then you have to reassemble them and put them together. And that is a very painful and inflationary process, the inefficient and inflationary process. The interesting part is that I still don't know why we have labor shortage. Nobody still has a good answer, which is a huge puzzle. For a while, the explanation was very easy. You paid people not to work, then they didn't work. Okay, so that was easy. But now it's almost like a lot of times the answer, it's not just one answer, but many different answers. And maybe it's a combination of people said, you know what, life is too short, and some baby boomers retired early. That could be part of it. I think if your school is online, it usually impacts women a lot more than men. They usually stay at home with kids, and that's pulls them out of labor force too. Other things like that. COVID in itself, because if you've been diagnosed, you have to stay home you have to be in isolation. It used to be for 10 days, now for 5 days. That pulls you out of labor force as well. A combination of all these things. The inflation is out of control. And I tell you the interesting part, everybody is raising prices on me now. Accountant raised prices by 50%. My bookkeeper raised prices by 50%, by 33%. Somebody else just raised prices on me by a lot. Not like 5%, 30 or 40%. It's just I can see prices going up all the time. Our compliance person just raised the prices by 50%. Prices are going up everywhere.
Come on, rich guy like you, that's no problem.
No, that's the thing.
I'm being facetious.
It can impact me a lot less than somebody who is making $18 an hour. They will be impacted by higher gasoline prices, by higher food prices, housing prices. Rents are going up through the roof. I'm not even complaining, I'm just noticing it. Those are the second order effects. When you shut down the economy, that's a first order effect. And you're trying to stop the spread, what are going to be the second order effects? That's something we always should think about.
I'm sure anybody around the world that now after lockdowns can walk their streets and see stores, restaurants, businesses, etc., that were once there, perhaps there for over a decade, and that are gone, not just temporarily closed, but gone. And now one has to think about, what does that mean? Okay, well, they're gone. That means they got their butt kicked. They've lost a lot of money. Their business is closed, so they don't have that money coming in. The person that was getting rent's gone. They still got to pay the mortgage. Now extrapolate that out across the economy. That is a nasty kick in the you-know-what.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it got covered up by this tremendous liquidity that has been thrown into the system. I want to switch topic a little bit on liquidity because I think it just amazes me how crazy things are. I have a friend who had a store that he sells baseball cards. He has the best year. He made more money in the last year and a half than he made in the previous 20 years. Just baseball cards. You start seeing what's happening with not one cryptocurrency, but a whole bunch of cryptocurrencies. And then NFTs. Anywhere you go, you see this excess. That is just a function of all this liquidity that we have in the system. And obviously it spills into stocks as well. Look at the housing market as well. Everything. Again, that's a second order effect of us shutting down the economy, by the way. And that's not going to end well.
That euphoria from that excess liquidity you described, that euphoria, I'm not going to say it's exactly like, but man, it is a kissing cousin of 1999. That's not trying to say things are going to unfold the same way, but that euphoria that I felt in 1999 from so many people, I'm not trying to say anything bad about them, but these weren't like the high intellects. These weren't high earners, but they were all rich on paper, and their attitude changed and their euphoria was there, and boom, boom, boom. So many people in 1999 were just like, oh my God, even NASDAQ's up 100%. And then things changed. And the euphoria from that period to this period definitely rhymes.
100%. I remember reading articles about how Warren Buffett lost his touch in 1999. And last year, you started to read the similar articles about Buffett. Cathy Wood became kind of the new Buffett.
What is her current drawdown?
Probably more than 50% from the high. It's kind of interesting. I looked at the stocks of ARK stocks just to see if there's something I want to buy. I think they have to decline. Some of them are down 70%, and they need to be down another 70% for them to be mildly interesting. Some of them very good businesses. It's just they're so incredibly overvalued. When a stock that trades at, 60 times revenues and declines to 30 times revenues, it's still very expensive stock. A company that's not making any money, still a very expensive stock. So there is a lot of that. There's a lot of that going on. I spent some time in the AMC. I just wanted to understand these people. I went into AMC Spaces on Twitter and just tried to listen to those apes. Again, I'm not calling them apes. That's what they call themselves. So I'm not trying to insult them. There was one woman who said something that really stuck with me. And you're not going to believe me what I'm about to say. She said, I did not realize investing was so difficult. I bought the stock. I'm going to the movies. I keep talking about AMC all the time, and I'm still losing money. That's a conversation you hear in those AMC GameStop rooms.
I'm not being mean, but that's almost that kind of analysis. And again, I'm not being mean. It's going to sound mean, but that's almost like an 80 IQ.
One thing I found when I listened to those people, they are incredibly lonely.
Lonely.
Yes, extremely lonely. They are in these rooms because they are trying to belong to a community. I was trying to be a good Samaritan. And I was like, well, I've been doing it for a long time. Maybe I'll give them some of my insight. And I was in an AMC room and I said, listen, imagine you have this company, market capitalization of $10 billion and has $10 billion of debt, $20 billion. In the best year it had 5 years ago, AMC made $100 million. But since then, its share count went up 5x, its debt went up 4 or 5x too. So I said, I know how this movie is going to end. This stock is going to decline probably 90% or more just because you're paying so much money for so little for a business which revenue declined 80 or 90% from its high. And they said, what about the popcorn that they're going to sell? What about the NFTs? And they basically laughed me out of the room as they basically called me hedgy and laughed me out of the room. And I was really trying to be a good Samaritan. I realized whatever common sense I have is going to be completely lost in there.
It's a fascinating perspective to think about loneliness as a potential driver all the way across the board, from crypto to the meme stocks, etc. And look, let's face it, after the last, let's say 1 month or so, a lot of the people that have gotten clipped, taken out to the woodshed and shot, so to speak, are these very people that had no experience. And I'm sure a lot of them have lost significant amounts of money relative to their net worth. I mean, they've been killed. All the things where the least experienced people were jumping in, they got some success, they felt confidence, and then the Grim Reaper walked in and cut them off at the knees. There's got to be a lot of people that are just devastated right now.
That's right. And it's very nihilistic. Us versus the system. It's them versus short sellers. Short sellers are the enemy for them in those rooms. I was explaining to them that it doesn't matter. Like, if short sellers will never short a single share again of AMC, it's still going to decline 90%. It doesn't matter. I was basically telling them, it's almost like you're a passenger on the Titanic. You're complaining about the paint while the ship is sinking. Short sellers for them would be like the paint. The ship is going to sink. You've seen this movie before. You know how it's going to end. The only thing I asked, I said, please, if you invest money into this, don't put it more than you can afford to lose. And the problem is a lot of these people will lose a lot more than they can afford. That's what really upsets me about this.
I made the comment on this podcast the other day. I said something to the effect that if you take a chart of Peloton, all the hot girls riding bikes, you take a chart of Bitcoin, you take a chart of the NASDAQ circa 2000 to 2002, and you put those charts on the wall with no name. I mean, they all kind of roughly look the same, just great run-ups and great run-downs. And that's the part that surprises me about people. is it doesn't require a lot of aptitude to just take a look at some charts over history. I'm not saying looking at a chart is trading a chart or anything like that. I'm just saying just the general idea of looking at how some of these markets clearly get run up with some type of manipulation or just euphoria and how they run down to the classic tulip bulb chart. I mean, it's amazing that people just in their moment of time, it's different now.
I wrote this article, I call it a kid you not market, describe the evolution of craziness in the market. And I started with the bond substitute stocks like Coke, picking the Coke because Coke trades at 30 times earnings. And the only reason people buy Coke because its dividend yields 2.6%, which is more than Treasury. Nobody doubts that Coke is going to be around the next 20 years and that you'll be collecting this dividend. People feel fine with that because they think, well, it's better than Treasury, except when at some point, if Treasury goes to 4%, Coke stock will decline 50% or more. That's kind of one level. And then you go to all the Cathy Wood stocks. And then you go to, it gets crazier, but at least they're real businesses. And then you go to Tesla, has a market capitalization greater than all automotive industry combined, probably globally now. Then you go to GameStop and AMC, but Tesla actually looks more rational compared to GameStop because Tesla is a company of the future, where GameStop is a retailer of video games, packaged video games, where digital video games are going to be, that 3 years from now, no one's going to be buying packaged video games. And then you get to cryptocurrencies. And here it gets very interesting because you have these two sides. You have Bitcoin maximalists who basically saying Bitcoin, our God and Savior, and that is the currency. And then you have a whole bunch of other people who say, well, it's the caveman's currency because it's very inefficient and there's a lot of drawbacks. And therefore, we invented the better currency. And there's probably a few dozen strong contenders. And you have know which one is going to succeed, but you know that not all of them are going to succeed. And then overlap all this euphoria that's going on around you. You know that I don't know what the price of this thing should be because they don't generate cash flows. And I could argue that most of them probably should be worthless. But you know that they're overvalued just by definition because there is so much liquidity in the system. Then you got NFTs. My son is a student at CU Boulder. He told me this story. Ozzy Osbourne, all of his friends now in their free time, instead of going drinking, they're spending their time in these chat rooms singing praises to crypto bats. That is an NFT that was created by Ozzy Osbourne. In these boards, the more praises they sing to these crypto bats, the more likely that they'll be able to buy these crypto bats at a air quotes wholesale price so they can flip it. Ozzy is going to create I forget the numbers, 9,200 crypto bats, NFTs. And my son was asking me, Dad, isn't that by the definition of a Ponzi scheme when everybody is buying it so they can just flip it? I'm like, that's exactly right. That is what's happening right now in the world. All the different craziness that's going on. I don't know if you read about this woman who was bottling up her farts and sold $200,000 worth of them online.
There's always a bunch of weird dudes out there that want to pay for kinky sex stuff. So,
The funny part about this is that I guess she had a very unhealthy diet and she had a medical scare, so she stopped doing it. Now she's just creating NFTs instead.
Let me throw something out at you because I think ties into where you've just gone in the last few minutes. Maybe I'm going to lay out a rough scenario for a longer piece that you could compose. Maybe you'll think I'm crazy or I'm onto something. If I think about peer pressure, I think peer pressure is governing a lot of, for example, why younger Americans are not working. It's governing why younger Americans are involved in crypto Ponzi schemes or other types of Ponzi schemes, GameStop, etc. It's governing why a lot of young ladies are on OnlyFans selling stuff. And I think this peer pressure is in such a way where it's, how can any young person today afford to work at McDonald's and work at Starbucks, work at Costco, work at Amazon? How can they afford to do that when the peer pressure of their peers, they're all making, it looks like, big money early in life, and they're doing it. Maybe a lot of people don't even know where that particular young lady is getting all of her money from. She's not telling anybody that she's doing something on OnlyFans. A young guy's not really necessarily telling everybody. Well, I guess the young guys probably talk about crypto more. But I think this peer pressure is governing a lot of why traditional jobs are empty and why young people are taking these chances on all this other stuff that looks good. And to put one more cherry on the top of it, I think this is allowed to happen by the older generations, because the older generations have basically just, I don't know, the boomers and Gen X and whatnot. It's kind of like, okay, they've got enough money in the bank. And it seems like there's a certain permissiveness where the discipline that maybe you and I saw growing up, whether that was discipline from adults or discipline from our own self, it seems to be lacking. I just can't imagine being 20 years old and wasting my time in the middle of Ponzi schemes. But if everyone is doing it and you're 20 years old, you probably feel tremendous pressure to stay in the middle of the whole thing. It's all tied together. And maybe you bring it up to liquidity issues. It's all kind of governed together. And it does have the feeling, it has the feeling that all of this could just get a pinprick pop at any moment.
So I think the peer pressure is enormous. And I'm observing my son. I'm a very proud parent. And I'm saying is, he is studying extremely hard. He's getting 4.0 GPA at CU Boulder. But he tells me, Dad, this friend of mine just bought this crypto bets for $300 and flipped it for $7,000. I'd like that. Do you blame him? He would like to make $600, $700 in one day. That doesn't have to carry in summertime and carry heavy bags for baby boomers. I think everything you said is true. And I think social media amplifies it as well. Because you see this on TikTok, you see this on Facebook or whatever, the Instagram and other places. But I think the good thing about it, at some point it will go away. It will go away because that's not normal. When it goes away, these kids are going to have to face reality. If they want to be able to buy lunch tomorrow, they may have to work at Starbucks. I'm somewhat more optimistic because one of the upsides of the bubble bursting.
The hard thing for me and you, though, is to try to think how we might act 30 years younger in the middle of this. You and I logically look at it and say, well, it has to end at some point in time. It has to pop. Maybe this generation, and I kind of see this in Bitcoin. Look, I would love for Bitcoin to succeed. I have no idea if it will or not in the long run. But I kind of see that people they reload. Meaning like if one thing blows up, they should otherwise be embarrassed and learn a lesson that you and I might learn. They don't seem to care, at least in this moment in time.
The problem is they can afford not to care because there's so much money in the system. Something's always going up. When things are declining and every time you buy the dip, it goes lower, it's incredibly demoralizing. In 2002, 2003, it was very psychologically difficult to buy anything that had a .com next to it because it was toxic. Even though 3 years before, you couldn't get enough of that. I think when the liquidity bubble deflates, and you kind of start seeing this already in the high-flying Cathay Wood stocks, those things kind of already start to lose their luster a little bit. Probably going to take another 30, 50% decline or more. People buying the dip and losing money before they give up on that. I'm actually more optimistic because I think bubbles never stay inflated forever. You run out of hot air. And in this case, hot air is that liquidity. At some point, it's just going to flash away.
That seems like a great place to end it, though, in the sense that this is where I wanted to go in this conversation. Because what I wanted to do was we weren't going to have a conversation telling people, buy this, sell this. No, that wasn't the point. The point was to get people to think about all these different issues that are punching us literally in the face at the moment. And how can one think about them and not ignore them, but just, okay, all of this is going on. Now, it's up to the individual person to say, if it comes to a market strategy, what market strategy do they want to apply in these types of environments? But I think the things that you and I talked about today, this is a wild time period. I mean, I guess we've had a lot of wild time periods since 9/11, frankly, or say since Netscape went public in 1995. It's been a wild 25 years, really. But it's a wild time right now in 2022. And we'll have to see how everything unfolds.
To bring it all together, I went to lunch with a friend of mine who's a dentist. And I don't manage money for my friends. I have that as a rule. And the reason I do this because I want to have this oasis of, I don't have to talk about the market. I don't have to talk about their portfolios, etc. He was basically telling me he has this money sitting in the bank. He was going to open another dental practice. And he can't because he can't find enough people. The prices are higher for everything, all these different things. He was telling me, maybe I should buy real estate. He said, because real estate prices, even after the 2008 crisis, still kept going up. And I said, you're right. The only reason they kept going up because interest rates have been declining in the last 30 years. If interest rates go up, it's not a certainty, but it's high probability that interest rates most likely will be higher a year from now, 3 years from now than they are today, then the housing prices will become a lot less affordable. It's a math. The bank will not give you a loan because you won't qualify to buy $1 million house when rates are 6%, 3% the year before. And the stock market overall, it is very expensive. And then if you look at bonds, they are very expensive. One thing I realized, and I'm a value investor, the only thing that is left is really do fundamental research, digging through the pile of garbage, today stock market, trying to find undervalued companies that are still 50 cents on the dollar kind of thing. I feel like that is the only sensible thing that's left to do. That's the only way to survive that. If you buy indices, I think, coming back to Jeremy Grantham's point, you're destined for very low returns going forward.
As a guy that's written a few trend following books, I do think that there are, from my perspective, in terms of track records that one can look at going back decades, there are value track records, and there are quant CTA trend following track records going back decades. There's not many styles out there that you can really look at and say, wow, that's something I can kind of hang my hat on. There's just not a lot out there. I think that's sometimes what people get messed up on. It's like I had a guy the other day, he came on to one of these social media platforms that I was on, and he started talking about trading Fibonacci nonsense. And I just called him out immediately. I said, that's a scam. He's, oh no, that's your opinion. No, it's not my opinion. It's a scam.
He likes the sexy name, Fibonacci.
Again, that adds to the whole mentality where we are at right now. But anyways, you and I could go on forever, and we probably should. It's always fun. Hey, where can people come check you out? I know you're writing, is it a weekly or monthly newsletter? Where can they come check you out?
2 places. They can read my articles on Contrarian Edge, EDGE, contrarianedge.com, or I have this Lazy Man's podcast, which is basically my articles on tape. I write the articles, somebody reads them to you. So if you're working out in the gym, you don't have time to read the article, you can listen to it. If you go to investor.fm or just look for Intellectual Investor Podcast in your podcast apps. That's it.
Cool stuff, sir. Vitaliy, thank you. I like to have a handful of people that I know that I can just have these all-around conversations. You're good at it. You got enough experience, so it's like I could throw anything at you. You're going to have a view or perspective. We're probably pretty much in the same headspace. If you disagree with everything that I said today, I don't think I'd want to have you on because I think you'd probably be batshit crazy. So,
no, I think you and I probably agree a lot more. And I think the key is that we tried to talk today about very complex, nuanced issues. Thank you, Michael.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.
Thanks for listening. If you know someone who'd enjoy this episode, share it with them. To listen to more episodes, visit investor.fm. Enjoy life and prosper.